The Just Baseball show in mid-January has some substance. Thank the heavens, it's got some substance. Alex Bregman put pen to paper with the Chicago Cubs for a 5-year, $175 million contract over the weekend. We also want to catch up on the latest happenings on the Bichette free agent front, on the Cody Bellinger free agent front, and a certain arbitration conversation with maybe the best pitcher in Major League Baseball. That's all coming up. Thank you for joining us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, X Live, or on Sports Grid. Jack McMullen, Aram Layton. Just Baseball show, as always, is presented by BetMGM. Reminder to make it legendary. It's a great time to make it legendary during the NFL playoffs. It's not postseason, it's the playoffs. Aram Layton, I know where you are going to be in early August. You are going to be at the Tupac bobblehead night at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Do I have that correct?
That bobblehead is honestly pretty sweet. When I saw the headline, I thought it was a little ridiculous. The bobblehead is really cool. I can't lie. It's pretty sweet.
I will tell you, the Mac Miller bobblehead at PNC Park last year was their fastest going bobblehead outside of Paul Skeens. Like, there was a line on the concourse ready to go get it, or line outside the home plate gate in Pittsburgh ready to go get the Mac Miller bobblehead. So I assume that the Tupac bobblehead is going to be a hot ticket.
But Mac Miller, like, his whole identity, I feel like, was entrenched in like Blue Side Park, and you think Pittsburgh, you think that when you think about Mac Miller, like in the kind of connection with Wiz Khalifa and all this. Didn't Tupac just live in Baltimore for like 5 years? If I have that right,
it was like middle school and high school, I think.
Yeah, it's cool connection. Just we're hey, bobbleheads bring people to the ballpark, so we're gonna keep getting creative with him. I'm sure. It's still sweet. I love it.
Certainly so, and excited to see what the draw for Oriole Park at Camden Yards is in early August for Tupac Bobblehead Day. The other thing that brings people to the ballpark is a high-level player at third base every single day, and the Chicago Cubs just did that. Again, Alex Bregman, 5 years, $175 million. We are going to save the Cub angle. We're going to save the Red Sox angle for a little bit later on in the show. So I want to start with Bregman, the guy. Alex Bregman has been as consistent a third baseman as we've had in Major League Baseball. Last 4 years, 3 of which with Houston and 1 with Boston. In 2022, this guy hit 260 with 23 homers and 93 driven in. In 2023 with Houston, 260, 25 homers, 98 driven in. In 24, 260, 26 homers. And in 2025, 273 with 18 homers and an 821 OPS. And it is 114 games with the Boston Red Sox. This guy has played in home ballparks that have been very conducive to him playing at his best, right? You've got the Monster in left at Fenway. You've got the Crawford boxes in left at Minute Maid, now Daikin Park in Houston, the home of the Houston Astros. This is a guy that's now going to test it a little bit, and we're 2 years removed from Isaac Paredes testing it, that air pull, that right-handed bat going to Wrigley Field. But the Cubs feel like they got their everyday anchor at third base. And it's cool that the Cubs are pushing the chips forward here. What kind of player do you think the Cubs are getting in Bregman?
I think they're getting a guy that's going to age well, and I think that's why they did it. You know, barring injury, right? And we'll see. In terms of aging well, like, it's more just when he loses a little bit of that whip and that strength or that explosiveness, like, how will the game be? Well, he's so fundamentally sound that he's always going to be a good defender at third base. His approach is so good that he's always going to get on base at a good clip. His bat to ball is so good that he's always going to put the ball in play. And the thing with him is he may not tear the cover off of the ball, but he hits the ball more than hard enough. And I just don't see that going away because of how efficient and compact his swing is. Yeah. So the other side is, I feel like people forget Bregman, like, he's gonna be 32 this coming season. It's not like he's 34. I do feel like he still has several years of, at least a couple years of playing at near the peak of his powers. And then after that, he's still going to be a good value player in terms of WAR because of all those other complementary factors. And I do really think that the injury affected him big time last year. And that was something that I wanted to make sure we harped on here. Like, in the first 51 games of the season, Alex Bregman had a 938 OPS and had a hard hit rate of 48%. His 90th percentile exit velocity, which takes the top 10% of your batted balls, was 104 miles per hour, which with his peripherals all around that is more than enough to be a really productive player. He was out for 2 months, kind of rushed back. It was a bit of a push to get there with that significant quad injury. And it was his right quad. So think about it. That's your back leg that you're trying to get into. And he uses every ounce of his body, especially his base, to produce these frame-defying exit velocities and power. From that point forward, the contact rate and the approach was exactly the same, but the hard hit rate dropped to 42%, and the 90th percentile exit velocity dropped to 102 miles per hour, which tells me his peak exit velocities were just diminished because he couldn't get off that same swing. And I think the only thing that's going to stop him from being able to get that swing off is a significant quad injury, not age. And I do think that this is a guy that is going to play well, even if it's not as friendly of an environment as Fenway, because none of those things are impacted by Fenway.
So I was going to ask you, in terms of Bregman, like why you thought that this was a game that wasn't going to be affected by Father Time, and you made it clear it's injury. And like you look at what has happened over the last 4 years, I'll use that 4-year sample again. Injuries are really not a part of his game. They were at the beginning of his career, right? He played 42 of the 60 games in 2020. He played 91 of the 162 in 2021. But then his games played 155, 161, 145, and then 114 with this quad issue now. So he's clearly durable. When you saw 5 for 175, did you have a knee-jerk reaction like, man, that's a lot of money? Because that was my initial thought.
I was kind of braced for it. Like, it definitely is a lot of money, but I feel like just after the last contract and then him opting out of it and what he flashed there, I guess we kind of figured it was going to be big. But from an AAV basis, it was definitely pretty crazy. I just thought we were going to get north of 150 one way or another there. I just thought maybe it would take an extra year to get there. But I think for the Cubs, especially with where they're at, I think they'd rather go a little bit shorter term and higher AAV. And it's exactly what they did. But yeah, I think everybody had the same reaction. And it's the price to pay. But I think for a lot of teams here, they'd rather go for this like tier 1B. And I think that's not fair to Bregman, but a tier 1B player where you don't have to go 7 years. I think that's why the Bellinger thing is going to take forever, as you guys talked about, because I think Bellinger is also tier 1B and he wants 7 years. 7 years plus is reserved for the tier 1A guys. So yeah, it was a lot of money, but I still think when you keep it under 200 for a guy of his caliber, I think you got to feel pretty good about it.
When you think about guys that, you're not really thinking about guys that are going to be 32 years old on opening weekend like Alex Bregman is getting a 7-year contract. So he wasn't going to have that happen. But when you think about guys at third base that were worthy of a 7-year contract when they signed something like that, you think of an Austin Riley who was in his mid-20s in Atlanta who signed it, and you know that this guy is going to be a Brave for the next decade plus. Jose Ramirez, another guy that Cleveland felt comfortable giving a long-term deal to. But at Bregman, it makes a lot of sense. And yes, Boris client, he has that opportunity to cash in on a high average annual value for 5 years. Notably, deferrals in this Cubs contract. It's not just the Dodgers, folks. But there was a little bit of a hang-up as it pertained to the Cubs versus the Dodger contract, or the Red Sox contract conversations. And again, we're going to hold the Red Sox conversation. But the thing that Bregman wanted was a no trade clause. And the Cubs gave him the no trade clause. The Red Sox were vehemently against giving him a no trade clause. Did you find it a little weird that they were both firmly like Cubs saying, yes, we'll give you that, you're a Cub for the next 5 years, and Boston saying, absolutely not, we're not going to give you that?
I remember the Marlins always having that team policy, right? And I always thought it was the first time I ever thought about it. I'm like, why have a team policy when you never know what situation may present itself? And maybe in this situation, it just wasn't worth it in the eyes of the Red Sox, who clearly would like to be able to get out of contracts that they deem underwater, a la Rafi Devers. But I don't believe in citing team policy because, like, I think different situations present themselves, like for the Marlins to be able at that time then to be able to extend Giancarlo Stanton, they gave him a no trade clause because that was the only way he was going to agree to that. And should they have signed him to that deal, that's a whole nother conversation. But that's how a team like the Marlins was able to get Stanton to agree to a deal. I don't believe in the team policy thing. I think that's kind of funny. But at the same time, too, it just seems like with the way that Craig Breslow likes to operate, I don't see anybody getting a no trade clause because I don't think Breslow wants to have anybody have leverage over him from everything I've gathered and everything we've heard.
And it's clear that even if you are the unspoken captain of the clubhouse, you could very well be gone over the course of a given year. We are going to talk about the Red Sox in a moment, but we will start with the Chicago Cubs lens on this. Just Baseball Show continues. Jack McMullen, Aram Layton, Alex Bregman on a 5-year, $175 million contract with a no-trade clause. A lot of money deferred in this contract. Bregman and the Cubs. Chicago has their third baseman. What does this mean for the Chicago Cubs? That's the big question, because there were plenty of reports out there that this could mean the end of Nico Hoerner's Cubs tenure. And Nico Hoerner, a guy drafted by this organization, developed by this organization, and blossomed into stardom and fan favoritism with this organization. Nico Hoerner is in the final year of his extension. He makes $12 million in 2026 before he hits free agency. Sahadev Sharma wrote a great article in The Athletic on Monday, pretty much explaining why a Hoerner trade would be silly at this point when you've already aced the offseason. He is the bird in hand. The question is, do you take the bird in hand or do you trade the bird in hand, get good assets back, and then you run with Matt Shaw every day at second base? Shaw versus Hoerner, is that the question now, or do you see an alternate road where all three can be happy?
I think it's going to be hard, but I think also you look at this Cubs team we talked about at the bench is not very good. So the idea of having Shaw in this like super utility role, I think is a great idea. But at the same time, I think if the goal was to say, hey, we're going to push all the chips forward on 2026, we want to win the World Series. Like, yeah, you hold on to Nico Hoerner, but less and less teams are operating that way. And I can guarantee you that the Cubs are not going to be thinking just 1 year. They're one of the most model-driven teams we have. I've talked about that a lot here. One of the most model-driven teams we have in Major League Baseball. And by that, it's more of the Brewers' way of operating than I think some of the other teams that we see, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, they spend more than the Brewers. But in terms of, trading assets sometimes when you would love to have them for another year because you would eventually lose them in free agency, or the offer ends up becoming so impressive that you can't walk away. Like the Rays, for example, they didn't want to trade Shane Baz. They weren't actively shopping Shane Baz. And as Eric Neander said in his own words, it got to a point where we just couldn't say no because the value was too much. And it was probably their model screaming at them and saying, you have to take this. So I think for the Cubs, man, I think there's a push, and sometimes you have those moments where you defy the model, but I think they kind of showed at the deadline that unless they really, really think this is a World Series team, I don't think they're going to defy what their parameters kind of are. I think they're in a great position though, where you have somebody behind Hoerner so you can listen. And if nobody meets your steep asking price, you keep Hoerner and you potentially try to re-sign him. But I do think that they're going to listen. And I do think they may even pick up the phone themselves because that's just the way that they operate. And I know Cubs fans are going to hate to hear that because they love Nico Hoerner and I love him too. I think he's one of the more aesthetically pleasing baseball players and just fills the stat sheet and so solid all around. But if you get a Carlos Legrand and another piece, I mean, that alters your pitching depth almost immediately in your organization. It might be hard to pass on that. I just don't think that they're going to hang up immediately now.
And let's make this clear. The Cubs farm system is not that good right now. It was good about a year or two ago, but as you look at it right now on the pitching side, you're looking at Jackson Wiggins being the clear-cut number one pitching prospect in their organization. And after that, is there much? You look at the top end of their hitting prospects and you say, okay, we've got some guys here, but they just traded their top hitting prospect, in Casey, who was probably slated to get pretty much bulk platoon reps in right field. So you look at that farm system, and I guarantee you Jed Hoyer and Carter Hawkins are doing that, and they're saying, could we bolster this while also winning? The question just becomes what do you deem Nico Hoerner movable for? Is it to bolster the farm system? I have no idea if that's the way that they're thinking right now. Could it be upgrading the DH spot? Could it be finding a corner outfielder and moving Seiya Suzuki to the DH spot? There are a couple of different ways to go about this.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting spot. Or could it be, further bolstering the rotation? You get a Bubic plus. There's a lot of different ways. But also, the thing that's interesting is you move a Hoerner. Again, I wouldn't if the goal was to win as many games as humanly possible this coming year. But if you move a Hoerner, you also clear up $13 million to potentially be able to do some other things because we just don't think the Cubs are going to go over the CBT. I still think you keep this group together and you push forward with, I think, what could be one of the more dynamic offenses in baseball if all things are clicking, especially if Ballesteros swings it well in the DH spot. Yeah, you got to put Say on a corner, but PCA can go play both positions at the same time. He's so damn good out there. So that should probably help hedge that concern. And you keep Horner, you have the best middle infield defensively in baseball too. So I think there's a strong argument to keeping them, but I think keeping Horner, but I think you got to listen at least.
Yeah.
That said, you have Sean, a utility role there too. All of a sudden this lineup is really, really freaking good. But when you look at the farm system, as you mentioned, it's Jackson Wiggins, then it's everybody else. I like Brendan Birdsell, but this is a far drop off from Jackson Wiggins. And then from Birdsell, you could argue that the next best pitching prospect is a kid that probably hasn't even debuted yet. So I think that's where you have to listen. But at the same time, I think the Cubs have a shot here to make some noise. And I think with the risk inherited on the Cabrera side and the upside at the same time, I think you got to give 2026 your best push. And I say you keep the band together.
Yeah, and it seems like they will. And Nico Horner is a first-round pick, and they just united the first and second overall pick from the 2015 draft. Dansby Swanson, the shortstop out of Vanderbilt, and Alex Bregman, the shortstop out of LSU. Lo and behold, Bregman is playing third base for the Chicago Cubs. This is Exhibit A of why you do not judge an offseason until it is over. Because a week ago, we were sitting here saying, so the Cubs' plan was just building a bullpen from scratch, and that's it? And then they go and trade for Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins, really talented right-handed pitcher, can run it up to 100 miles an hour, one of the best curveballs in the sport, a changeup that'll get to 97. Yes, I didn't misspeak. And then you go and sign Alex Bregman a little bit later. I still think the Toronto Blue Jays have won the offseason in Major League Baseball. I think the Pirates, relative to expectations, have also done really well, but I think the Cubs are kind of entering that Mount Rushmore conversation of winning the offseason.
And they're going to pick their spots. I think as frustrating as it is when they're stagnant, I think at least Jed Hoyer's earned the perspective, I guess, on him that is, hey, they're not going to fully be dormant. They're going to look for the opportunities and pounce on them, and that's what they did. And we also said right after that Cabrera trade, okay, here we go. Here comes another move. And sure enough, it happened. I didn't think it would happen that quickly. Yeah. But then the third piece that we floated was where we got a lot of pushback. It was like, oh, well, then what if they do Horner after that? I'm interested to see what happens there. But it's going to be a lot of fun to monitor one way or another. And I still feel like this is a team that you get Justin Steele back at some point this coming season as well. There may not be as much urgency to address that rotation, and they could be in a pretty good spot.
And that's what a trade deadline is for, too. Also, my apologies for not mentioning the Baltimore Orioles when I was just rattling off the top of my head the winners of the offseason. Baltimore certainly in that bucket as well. But the Chicago Cubs, they add Alex Bregman, and they have been one of the big offseason winners in Major League Baseball. One of the big losers in Major League Baseball this offseason has been the Boston Red Sox, and that fan base was livid after this news came through on Saturday night. It was during Bears-Packers that Alex Bregman signed with the Chicago Cubs. More on the Red Sox in a moment on the Just Baseball show. Just Baseball show presented by BetMGM. Reminder to make it legendary. Jack McMullen, Aram, Leighton, Peyton Genus is live producing Podcast P in the flesh. Both hands up in the background right now. All right, we talked Alex Bregman, the player. Talked Alex Bregman and the Cub fit, what the Cubs do next. Now let's talk next steps for the Boston Red Sox. And there were plenty of people that were incredibly upset, including some of the dignitaries of Red Sox media, right? Tom Caron, who has been a longtime host at NESN, pretty much said, you have the right to be upset. This was kind of the anointed captain of the Boston Red Sox getting traded less than a year after you trade Rafi Devers, who was the future of the franchise. And this is the same franchise that traded Mookie Betts a half decade ago. Like everything was just coming up anger for the Boston Red Sox and for their fan base after this happened. And I saw a couple of tweets that related this feeling of helplessness and anger to the Xander Bogaerts one. I'll push back on that because Xander Bogaerts getting $290 million from the San Diego Padres was like, you let that happen. Yeah, it's a criminal overpay. It seemed like the structure was pretty similar, but like we mentioned previously, huge resistance against a no trade clause. They refused to include that in the deal, and ultimately Bregman goes elsewhere. How valid is the Red Sox fan base anger?
100% valid because there's multiple facets to it. Also, they said the $2 million and the no trade clause. They just did that to make it sound a little. It was fully the no trade clause. There's no way the $2 million was the difference there.
No.
And Bregman cited a very valid reason. It wasn't just like, I want to hold you hostage. It's like, I want my kids to grow up in one spot. Like, okay, at 31, with the way that you've performed and what you've earned in terms of leadership and the role on that team, and you could argue the Red Sox really need that, right? Like, you traded Rafi Devers. You cited, some of the maybe issues in terms of how he jived with the rest of the team, but also it was the contract, right? So you get out from that contract. And also part of the reason why that Devers situation went south was bringing in Bregman and moving over Devers. So if you retain Bregman, at least it's like, okay, but it ended up being, you just had Bregman for 2/3 of a season, allowed that because you handled the situation so poorly in communicating with Devers, who you knew was probably a little bit more emotional. And there's a lot of players. You have all different types of personalities, and it doesn't mean they're a good or bad guy. But if you have a guy that you know is going to be a little bit more reactive, you got to be proactive there and talk about it. He didn't handle the situation well there. The whole Red Sox front office didn't handle the situation well there. You upset your previous franchise cornerstone guy. You move him, but at least you have the backup of saying, well, we got Bregman though. And so fans could at least cope with that. And then after 100 and whatever games we just said, Bregman's out the door because of team policy on a no trade clause. I think fans can cite it's a lot of money. The Cubs have been very careful about the money they're spending. And mind you, operate pretty similarly to now the way that the Red Sox do, because the two GMs were in tandem before and they were fine to do it. So I think Red Sox fans have every right to be upset. And you look at this team, their payroll is currently slotted to be $26 million less than last year.
Yeah.
And you could argue that last year they could have bumped it up a little bit higher too. The only two moves we've got so far are two trades in which the salaries were paid down. They were paid down. I love this graphic, Podcast B. The salaries were paid down of the two veterans you acquired. And what's the average age of the two guys you got? 36, 35 years old?
Sonny Gray was 36 years old. Wilson Contreras was 34. So 35
I like
years
both
old.
trades, by the way.
Yeah, but by the way, they were both on a sinking ship. Like, they had to get traded. So you found two sitting ducks and you acquired two 35-year-olds effectively.
And got it paid down, which is great if you reinvest it. Now, I don't want to fully, knock them yet, because they have an opportunity here. There's still guys out there, maybe they surprise you with the Bichette, which we're going to talk about. I don't think they do that. Maybe they surprise you with a Tucker and then trade, a Jarren Duran.
Maybe they trade for Nico Horner.
Maybe they, yeah, probably not. I just don't know, man. I think Red Sox fans have every right to be upset, because similar to the same things we say about the Cubs, these teams shouldn't be operating this way. But I think the Red Sox are operating less efficiently because they're stepping on their own toes.
We've got about a minute left on this segment. All I want to say is you can't get caught like this. You can't get caught where your ideal free agent signs elsewhere and you say, oh man, what do we do now? And that's where I feel like the Red Sox are. You look at roster resource on Fangraphs and you see Marcelo Meyer playing third. That's awesome. Like, Marcelo Meyer needs to play. Absolutely. But you look at second base and it's like, okay, is Romy going to be the guy there? Is Nick Sogard going to be the guy there? Do you try David Hamilton again? You can't piecemeal second base together when you should be contending for a World Series, contending for an American League pennant like the Boston Red Sox are. And my thought is, like, it's like a college football program banking on a quarterback. It's like, oh, we're going to go get our quarterback in the portal. And then all of a sudden you don't have $4 million to pay a quarterback. What do we do now? You have to find a quarterback next year. And the Red Sox need someone. That's my thing.
Can we do another couple minutes on the other side of the break on the Red Sox? I have a couple more things.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that is really where the crux of my issue lies. You cannot get caught to the point where you are in scramble mode and you will end up in a worse spot than you could have even forecasted. And that is where I feel like the Boston Red Sox are right now. More in a moment on the Just Baseball Show. Second half of the Just Baseball Show rolls on. Jack McMullen, Aram, Leighton, Peyton Genis. You want a couple more thoughts on the Boston Red Sox. I compared it to just kind of like getting caught in a situation where you don't have like an appropriate pivot. And it feels like the Red Sox have exhausted all options of a possible pivot. Where are you at?
If they contemplate moving one of the best defensive center fielders in the sport back to second base. Red Sox fans should riot if Ceddanne Rafaela is moved back to second base to try to create a solution here. That would make it, you're just compounding the issue. The other thing is this infield right now is much worse than it was last year because guess what? You cannot bake in Christian Campbell to the lineup right now. And the funniest part about that is, and I'm rooting for the kid, I really hope he has success, but we vocalized our concerns going into the year. We got crushed for not having him in the top 30 when he was, I guess, top 10 everywhere else. And I'm not just saying that to pat ourselves on the back. I'm saying for a team that's been so apprehensive to spending money, you take a player who broke out of nowhere in 1 year, doesn't have defensive value, and has clear outlier swing mechanics, and you say, let's lock this guy up. Now, it's a good deal if he ends up being anywhere near his potential, but there was clear volatility to the profile, and now you can't even trade him because there's money attached to him that teams just don't want to take on until he shows a little bit more, and he might. And maybe you can trade him next year because he's a really good player, or maybe you don't want to and he's a cornerstone for you. But there's a lot of things that he needs to figure out, and he's scrapping the swing and kind of starting over and trying to rework things. That's not a guy I'm giving a pre-arb extension to, with even though it's a team-friendly deal, quote unquote, you'd still be on the hook for 13.2 in 2031 and 16.2 in 2032, and you already started paying him more than the league minimum last year. And this year he's making 2.25. So for a team that's so careful with every dollar they spent, they got a little overexcited about their diamond in the rough they thought they found here. And I just think that part is really interesting as well. I think there's a lot of examples here where the Red Sox try to operate a certain way and then end up undercutting themselves and then compounding their own issues as well. They got to figure that infield situation out, and moving Rafaela from center field would be the worst way to do that.
Yes. One more quick thing on the Christian Campbell thing. It was 1 year effectively. And I understand that he had some really solid college numbers behind him, and he had okay numbers at the pro ranks behind him as well going into that 2024 season. But in 2024, this guy was the best hitter in minor league baseball. What happens in 25? You give him the extension. He's really not good. He gets optioned and he doesn't come back for you. But I want to call back to spring training as well. There was a 2-week stretch in spring training in 2025 where this guy was lost. You saw one full season where he was playing out of his mind. My thought is you have to let this guy settle in to hibernate over an offseason, come back and do it again. Yeah. You had pretty much a 3 calendar year sample of Roman Anthony, and you give him $100 million. Great. That was awesome.
You had 80 big league games too, yeah. or however many.
I don't understand why it was 2024 and that's it to warrant that extension for Christian Campbell. It makes no sense to me. You have to let this guy cool off, face adversity, come out of adversity. And once you see that, you can feel comfortable giving that guy an extension. Yeah. That was my big hang up on that deal.
Just wait till they end up trading Duran to the Royals and they get Bubic, Jonathan India, and something else, and we're gonna be looking at India at second base, and it's like, all right, you got Christian Campbell basically right now on the downside. We'll see. But the good news to wrap up on the Red Sox, they have a lot of assets and they have a lot of ways to get out of this. But with the way things have gone, I don't know how much I trust Breslow to be able to do that.
I don't know. We'll see. It was also tough seeing Tristan Casas at Sox Fest, or what do they call it? Red Sox Fest? I know the White Sox call it Sox Fest. I think the Red Sox might call it Sox Fest too, but they're like off-season shebang. Tristan Casas with there pretty much saying like, Wilson Contreras has achieved much more in this game than I have. He absolutely deserves to start at first base. You've got a sitting duck that has big league success at Casas. Pair him with a prospect. What can you get back? Maybe they move Duran. We shall see. I want to talk about Bichette at this point because Bichette on Monday met with the Philadelphia Phillies. It was virtual, is my understanding. Ken Rosenthal on Foul Territory said, quote, "If I had to guess right now, I would say they're the favorite." The Philadelphia Phillies, I brought this up in passing on the Friday Just Baseball show last week when it broke that he was meeting with the Phillies. And you said, where do they keep spawning money from? This would obviously be the start of a couple of other transactions. Like if Bichette came into the fold, Bohm is gone, and that clears up some money. And there's probably another guy that would go as well. Probably takes them out of the Real Muto conversation as well, although I'm not sure. They need a catcher. Where do you stand on the Bichette Philly match?
I love it because of the fact that, yeah, you'd have to figure things out, right? You probably move Bohm, but they're still about 24 million below last year's final payroll. And if you sign Bichette and trade Alec Bohm, you should be right around that same number. And yeah, I think when you look at what they've been trying to do here, there was some quotes from Dave Dombrowski about, and this was more as it pertained to the outfield, but
Yep.
how the Phillies were trying to look for a right-handed outfielder. It's just not out there. And Dombrowski was saying, there's been times throughout my career as a general manager or president of baseball operations where just sometimes exactly what you need is just not out there in the market. And I know that that's probably a frustrating, wrinkle in things. And this doesn't necessarily directly answer it, but I think it does answer the larger conversation and larger issue that they have. Is I don't think it necessarily had to be an outfielder. I think that's just where they had the more clear-cut opening. They just need a good right-handed bat, a good proven right-handed bat in this lineup, because other than Trey Turner, and you assume you're going to trade Alec Bohm, but even if you include him, the only other right-handed bat you've got right now in the starting lineup is Adolis Garcia, who's a bounce-back candidate. They sorely need a right-handed bat, and I think they've given up on it needing to be an outfield bat, and I think they're focused on it needing to just be a bat, period, and you figure the rest out from there.
Were you a little surprised that you saw zero smoke between the Phillies and Harrison Bader this offseason? He fits what they would have needed, and he was good for them last year after the deadline, but I also understand if they have minimal confidence in him repeating that.
Yeah, I think that paired with the money that it would cost, even though if it's not insane, but like from some of the things that they want to do. And then I think the fact that they want to give Justin Crawford a shot here. And I do think a Crawford platoon with Johan Rojas on the short side, though Crawford did hit lefties well last year. If that's your 9 hitters and they both defend really well, I think if it allows you to then push all of your chips towards higher ceiling guys, I think it makes a little bit more sense. I'm really interested, though, if you do sign Bichette, you imagine you put him at second base, you trade Bohm. Bryson Stott's probably very capable of learning third base, right? And then if he's not doing a great job there, then you can go and call up Aiden Miller. I think that's a good enough situation there where you rock with those two. Also, Miller could come up and take the short side of the platoon. Is that how you go about it, I guess, is my question, because I wouldn't hate it. He's played like 2 games at third base in his big league career.
I know Bichette has played second base and did it in the World Series. Could Bichette be a fit at third base? Would they try that or no chance?
I think they got to try it and see what happens. I think it's more just what Bichette wants to do, because it does make more sense to have the glove of Stott at a position that he's good at instead of kind of nerfing his defense and putting Bichette there, who's going to be better than he is at short, but not going to be great. That's going to be a huge crater defensively from what you had before.
Right. But to your point, the clapback is Aiden Miller is pretty much ready to go at some point, and then Stott becomes expendable. You can take your time trading a Stott as opposed to a Bohm where you'd probably need to get him out of there before opening day, and there are plenty of teams that would take on an Alec Bohm. It's going to cost a ton of money. Did you think the Phillies were going to wade in these waters? It seems like Bichette's going to get $200 million at this point.
I didn't think so, but you just, I think at this point we got to always consider them to be in on just about everybody, because they're going to find a way to spend. And I love that they operate that way, because we just talked about a couple other orgs that don't. So I think when you can clear the Bohm side of things and then maybe even the Stott side of things, it makes sense. Even if they have to pay down 80% of Castellanos, that's 20% of his money that you clear up. So I think it puts them in a pretty good spot. And I think Otto Kemp is a really, really underrated guy in this whole thing as well. He had a really good year. I know the Phillies are high on him, and he played some third base as well. So that could be another guy that moves all over. You could trade both Stott and Bohm if you wanted to, and Kemp holding it down until Aiden Miller is ready. I still think that would be a better offense than you had the year before, given that, the limitations of Stott and Bohm. And I know those are 2 glue guys, but it's time to shake it up. Like, if this team's come up short too many times, you can't cite the clubhouse when they're not really going across the finish line.
Yep. Time to burn some sage and get some new life in there. Also, Edmundo Sosa. Don't forget about Edmundo Sosa, who had a 3-homer game by the end of the year. So we will get to some other guys in the market next. Just Baseball Show rolls on. Jack McMullen, Aram Layton. We just talked about Bo Bichette and his free agent outlook. Bo Bichette met with the Philadelphia Phillies on Monday. Not sure who else he is meeting with. It seems like the Yankees are kind of swimming in the Bichette waters at this point. They are not, it seems like, concretely swimming in the Cody Bellinger waters. At least they're not swimming in the Cody Bellinger waters that Scott Boras wants them to be swimming in. The Yankees have offered Cody Bellinger, this is according to Bob Nightingale, 5 years, about $160 million with no deferrals. Bellinger and Boras are hell-bent on getting a 7-year deal. If you put 5 for 160 in front of Cody Bellinger, are you floored that he's not taking it right now?
No, because of who his agent is, but otherwise, yes. Podcast P shaking his head about the money there. I agree. I like Bellinger. I'm bought in. We talked about it in the Diamondbacks playing GM episode. Yeah. I think he's a good fit for a lot of teams. Also, one last thing before I forget. Yeah. The other wrinkle why I think it's a slam dunk for the Phillies, aside from Bo just fitting in, I think, to the culture there and everything, is the Don Mattingly influence, who he's cited as a mentor as well. So I love that wrinkle in it as well.
Which Toronto just agreed to become the bench coach for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Which just timing is great there. I think the Yankees are fine sitting there and saying, go get your 7 years, kind of like the Bogarts thing. Where, like, if somebody out there is willing to give him 7, so you tip your cap and say, shit, okay. It would be tough for the Yankees, though, because they really need to then replace his production, and I don't know if they'll be able to do that. And that's why we have a staring contest now, because I think Boras knows that, and the Yankees know that, or at least feel confident that no one's given him 7. And I do ultimately think this is a staring contest that would end up favoring the Yankees. However, that's why we did the playing GM to the Diamondbacks. Like, that's where the Diamondbacks sometimes come out of nowhere and say, we'll give you the same exact offer. And you're going to have, you're going to take home more. You're going to go back home and, or we increase it by $5 million, let's say. Then it becomes a little bit of a conversation. But I think it's a staring contest that we had a similar thing come out. I think, if I remember correctly, with the Yankees and a player as well. This is where Podcast P, I might call you out of the bullpen here. Was there not a similar kind of leaked situation where it was the Yankees and ex-player are distancing themselves and they ended up bringing him back?
I'm trying to think. Peyton has no idea right now. He's shaking his head.
I'll try to dig that up, but I want to say that happened in the last couple of years and then ended up bringing him back. So I think it's a lot of posturing, and you're talking about two teams here that probably, or two sides here. This is weaponizing the media, and then you also know that the Yankees and Cashman are going to do that. They've always done that. So this is where the reporting around this whole thing is like, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, 100%. I just look at the Yankees and they're putting themselves in a position to possibly get beaten for Bellinger. And unlike the Red Sox and Bregman, I think the Yankees are okay if they get beaten out for Cody Bellinger's services. Meanwhile, Boston, they're not okay getting beaten out for Alex Bregman's services.
Exactly.
And now they're kind of scrambling. If Bellinger were to go to an Arizona or were to go somewhere else, heck, were to go to the New York Mets, the Yankees are fine because they have their outfield of Dominguez in left, Grisham in center, and of Judge in right.
Yeah.
And you're cool with that.
Bellinger, it's not great, but it's definitely better than the infield that the Red Sox are dealing with. It at least has more upside.
Puts him over the top, man. And Dominguez has been your top prospect for how many years? Grisham
is overhated, by the way. Dominguez hit a 103 WRC plus last year. He was a little banged up. He's a switch hitting 22-year-old. I still think he could take a big step forward this coming season.
The one you point to is Grisham, but Trent Grisham is on the hook for $22 million. So that's not a negligible amount of money that you can just saddle on the bench and not play. No. He's going to play.
He's a 3-win player last year.
Yeah, Grisham was a 3-win player, and Jason Dominguez was solid in his own right, 719 OPS. Thank you, Peyton, for pulling that out.
The issue is the defense. Another guy that is way too fast and way too talented to be as bad as he is at defense. I imagine he practiced all offseason. You hope that he got better with his reads and routes. He's an elite arm. If the defense can just be shored up a little bit, I think he's in a pretty good spot. Then the batted ball angles were, a little bit of a challenge here and there. I think the Yankees have ragdolled him in his development as well. I think all the expectations for him have been unfair, and I think it's been a really rough ride for a guy that really it hasn't been that bad at all at the big league level. So I still think he's a candidate to take a big step forward. I think Ben Rice is a candidate to take a big step forward. Where I'm curious is like the McMahon / shortstop / really just that situation. And then if Dominguez is hurt, which is a very fair question because he is hurt quite often, I need somebody, at least an insurance policy out there. And I think they can pivot and do that, or at least grab a guy that can take the short side of the platoon. Because right now, Jason Dominguez just shouldn't be hitting much from the right side. So there's something out there. They're going to have to pivot to some other moves, but I agree with you. It wouldn't be as dire, but this team wouldn't be a World Series favorite without Bellinger. I think it hurts. I think they're definitely a notch down from where they would have been.
Sure. Now the counter is, it's a lot like the situation that we ran into going into the 2025 season where Soto signs for $765 million. And lo and behold, you have $700 million of free play here because you were anticipating booking Soto for $700 million. And they went a whole bunch of different ways, right? They signed Goldschmidt, they signed Fried. They brought in a couple of guys and they sort of kind of got to that level of money, but not even close. There are pivots that are in the $160 million bucket. If you have $30 million annually that you were ready to commit to Cody Bellinger that you're not, you can commit 25 elsewhere. So I'm thinking, all right, that short end of the platoon outfielder, why don't you bring in somebody like, I'm not going to throw Miguel Andujar out there, but why don't you bring in somebody like an Austin Hayes? Why don't you bring in, heck, maybe a Bader?
I was going to say, bring Bader back. He's an insurance policy for two different positions and takes the short side of the platoon for both whenever you need, and then can play a little bit more regularly as well. I think that's another great pivot. And they can put more money into other positions.
Yes, exactly. And to your point, like the McMahon, the shortstop thing, I'm actually okay with Caballero playing short pretty much every day. Caballero proved that there is some serious value there defensively on the base pads, and then also he can swing it just enough. But third base is the one for me. Do you roll with McMahon? Do you try and get out of that money? And do you upgrade at third base? I have no idea what their answer is.
I like Rosario on the short platoon side of that, and then McMahon's going to defend and run into 20. So I think it makes sense from that perspective. But, that's where you could start to say, oh, maybe Gino, whatever. But then at the same time, it's like, there's a real world where that's a lateral move. So I'm really interested to see how they pivot. I think you could also make the case of them pivoting for, just to push all the chips forward on Kyle Tucker and circle back. I think, yes, it's more money, but I think you can justify it a little bit more. And I love Tucker's profile in that ballpark. Maybe they find a way to get out of the McMahon money, put that towards Tucker, and then they can actually make a huge splash.
And then they would seriously be cooking with gas. But again, it's just not the end of the world if they do not retain a Cody Bellinger. We are going to wrap with a really tough conversation about an ace next. Tying a bow on the Just Baseball show, we just talked Cody Bellinger. Now I want to get into the Tarik Skubal Tiger relationship. I said tough conversation going into the last break because it really signals that the relationship between Tarik Skubal and the Detroit Tigers is fractured at this point. Arbitration filings were due at the end of last week. So the way that works is you've got the player and his agent filing at a certain number that they believe they should be making. If they are an arbitration eligible player, the team files at another number. More often than not, say 90% of these cases, 80 to 90%, get resolved. They agree to terms on a contract for that upcoming year, and they do not go to an arbitration hearing where both sides will plead their case in front of a third party, a non-biased third party. Typically, when these do go to an arbitration hearing, they're $500,000 apart, maybe $1 million apart. For some of the bigger deals, maybe 1.5 apart. The Detroit Tigers think Tarik Skubal should be making $19 million in 2026. Skubal and his agent Scott Boras believe he should be making $32 million. That is a $13 million difference. That is a staggering number, a never before seen number in terms of where a player is filed at and where a team is filed at. 32 would blow the previous pitcher arbitration record out of the water. Absolutely. Is that justified? Probably. He's coming off of back-to-back Cy Young awards. First guy to do that in the AL since Pedro Martinez. $19 million on the Tiger front wouldn't even set an arbitration record for pitchers. David Price has that about a decade ago. Now, the
with the Tigers, ironically, right?
For the Tigers, the big disclaimer there is Price was on his fourth arbitration year, Skubal on his third, because Price was one of those super two guys that got 4 arbitration years. But This is just a mind-numbing difference in filing numbers between the Tigers and Tarik Skubal, and it seems like this relationship is probably done.
What's interesting though is price got what, 19.75. If you adjust for inflation, that's $27.5 million roughly. That's not that far off from Skubal's ask, which Skubal is better than Price was at that time, as good as Price was. So I think, I mean, that's probably part of what Boris is going to be arguing here. Also, I think there's like components to the CBA where it's just you're able to ask for a little bit more when players have special accomplishments and things like that. And I mean, you had Cy Young winner, back-to-back Cy Young Award winner here. Like, I'm sure there's a business reason why, and I think the Tigers have already accepted that the ship has sailed, and if they do want to trade Skubal, if things aren't going right, he's cheaper in the second half of that trade, also just cheaper in general for them. But it just seems like they could have came in a little bit higher. I think if it was a 22 to 32 gap, I'd understand it because of how unique this circumstance is. Sure. But 19 is a little crazy given the back-to-back Cy Youngs, given the precedent of David Price, and given just how freaking good Tarik Skubal is. But it's just surprising to see the gap that big.
And I appreciate Peyton's joke here on the graphic. If you're with us on Sports Grid, on X, or on YouTube, the Tigers, the arbitration hearing probably, quote, see he has a below average ground ball rate. Here's the toughest part about all of this. We actually need to go into a trial-like situation, and the Tigers need to tell Tarik Skubal and his representation to their faces why they think he's a $19 million pitcher in 2026. And Corbin Burns went on the record saying that is really what soured his relationship with the Milwaukee Brewers, right? He said arbitration was tough because you sit there and you pretty much hear a team tell you why you shouldn't be paid as much as you think you should be. And Skubal needs to hear that at a $13 million difference. I can't imagine the mental gymnastics the Tigers are trying to do right now to justify a $13 million pay cut from what he feels like he's owed.
Yeah, and then it'll be – I don't envy whoever has to try to make the argument against Tarik Skubal. And it would be less about Skubal, it would just be more about the market. There's no way that you could poke a hole in Tarik Skubal unless you wanted to go back to his days at, like, is it Seattle University?
Seattle U, yeah. Too long a hair at Seattle U.
Like, there's just no way. So that might be the hardest sometimes I'll watch like true crime or whatever, sure, and you see the attorney that's representing somebody that just so obviously did it. And it's just like, how do they even, I know someone has to represent them, but how do they even do it? Like, this feels like the same thing. It's like, how do you argue against Tarik Skubal for earning what he wants to earn? And again, it doesn't even need to be the full 32, but here's the funny thing about it is once you go to trial, right, if I'm not mistaken, it's one or the other. There's no middle ground. So if you don't settle, it's going to be 32 or 19. And look, I'm no expert on arbitration, but I know where I'd put my money in terms of where I think it would go. I think there's a much better chance that the biggest gap in the history of arbitration goes in the favor of the back-to-back Cy Young Award winner. At least that's what I think.
You would think so. You would certainly think so. So we'll see what comes of that. Again, Tarik Skubal and the Detroit Tigers, they're going to go to an arbitration hearing. This has been the Just Baseball Show. That's Aram Layton. Peyton Genas has been along for the ride as well. Real quick, pour one out for Peter Apple, who officially cannot use Pierce Johnson in his Playing GM episodes moving forward. Pierce Johnson is officially a Cincinnati Red, so he is not on every team. We will continue with the Playing GM episodes all week long. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time.